On this episode, we are featuring a psychedelic integration coach, helping people to maximize their psychedelic experience potential. He is an expert on subjects like psilocybin, mushrooms, LSD, ayahuasca, and MDMA. I'd like to welcome Greg Lawrence to the show. How you doing, Greg?
Good, Dylan. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, man, it's good to have you on. I know, I kind of talked a little bit off air with you that, I've touched on this subject quite a few times in previous episodes, but never in detail or with an expert such as yourself. So, really excited to have you on the show. I feel like it's a very important topic in many ways, maybe even ways that I'm not even aware of that maybe I'll come to light today. But, I just believe there's some like demonization on some of the substances still, and perhaps they're even misunderstood by the general population. And maybe we can get into various reasons why that is too. But I do feel like that there's something special about these substances, and kind of like you know what what kind of doors it could open for you. I guess, if you will. I guess kind of how did you get all started in all this?
Oh, goodness. Well, I was using psychedelics in my late teens through my late 20s, but unfortunately, that was a while ago. Unfortunately, I got mixed up in hard drugs, and those sort of took control, and my life spiraled out of control. And I was just about at the bottom of the barrel when I was lucky that someone pulled me out of that barrel. I was able to move away from the area where I lived and basically, clean my slate of friends, start off cold turkey. And I just stopped using everything except for cannabis, which I have used for about 20 years. And then just about 7 years ago, I had a personal tragedy. Really threw me for a loop. And I realized at that time I had a lot of childhood trauma that I had not dealt with. So I was seeing a psychotherapist and a coach, someone who worked very much like I do with clients. And I was trying to quit smoking cigarettes. I smoked cigarettes at the time. And my coach said, I heard that psilocybin helps with that. I had not used psychedelics for 40 years at that time. So I got some mushrooms and I took them and had this tremendously enlightening experience where I could see why things were going wrong in my life, what had happened to me, the exact moment some things caused a certain trauma and behavior in me. And I thought, wow, now things are really going to change. And in about 3 or 4 weeks, everything was back to normal. This is not uncommon. There's a period sometimes called the pink cloud, where after the psychedelic experience, it seems like everything's going to be different. And then all the controls and the ego and the mind come back, and slowly you slip back into your old patterns. So this happened a few times, and I tried to find out what I could do. And I happened upon the idea of integration. And I went to a couple of integration circles. Those are safe spaces where people get together and talk about their experiences and share, build community. I was eventually asked to lead those things. I've been doing that for over 3 years now. But through using psychedelics and integrating those experiences by changing habits and changing my patterns and ways of being and thinking, I was actually able to sort of transform myself. I was very much a different person almost 7 years ago. I was very impatient, angry. There's no way I could work in the field that I'm in now in the shape that I was in. So psychedelics are something that helped me change my life for the better. And what I'm doing now is trying to help people do that as well.
So that's a kind of what you're doing for people. Then you're kind of like the guide or the coach that kind of
Well, as
helps. Go ahead.
as an integration coach, I work with people before and after an experience. The middle they do themselves. Because the substances are illegal, but there's nothing illegal with helping someone. So beforehand, I'll help people with things like how to surrender, how to stay grounded, navigate, breathe, what to do if things become unsettling or frightening, because it's a very important part of the process. Basically, to help the person get the most out of the experience, help them shape their intentions, a lot of different things we do in that work. Afterwards, we look at someone's sort of their lesson or the theme, and there is always a lesson in the psychedelic experience if you know where to find it. And then we determine, what do you want to do with that information? What kind of a change or a shift do you want to make in your life? And there are various ways we can do that with habit formation, things like cognitive behavioral therapy, neurolinguistic programming, a lot of different personal and spiritual development disciplines and practices. We help people make slight changes in their life, which can lead to profound changes down the line. But it's to help someone make a change that was sort of given to them by the psychedelic experience so they can take it with them.
And this is something that's relatively new in Western culture, no? Or
Yeah, and in more tribal societies, I mean, there is almost always, almost every culture or civilization has some sort of plant or visionary medicine of some kind
mm,
that people used, sacramentally, religiously, socially, to help themselves connect with themselves, their tribe, their family, with spirit. They even use small amounts for things like aphrodisiacs, for dexterity, for endurance, hunting, sharpen their vision, a lot of different things. But in those societies, everyone kind of worked together and you didn't have the kind of neuroses that we have today. So integration in this sense wasn't as important back then. Modern society, we have the nuclear family, we have all the pressures of everyday life, and we have these traumas that get laid on us from the time we're born until we get to a certain point. So peeling those things away is a process. Psychedelics are being recognized as something that can help you in that. So yeah, psychedelic integration coaching is something that's relatively new. There are more and more coaches all the time, but it's something you've just started hearing about recently and you'll hear a lot more about in years to come.
yeah, that's exciting. And I know in other cultures like you were touching on, they have, shaman or people that kind of guide the ceremonies and stuff like that. And so that's sort of kind of what you do as far as integration goes, because that's kind of what they're doing, right?
Well, mine is more in the aftermath. Sometimes people are confused by what happened or what it
Hmm.
meant or what I do with it.
Right,
Psychedelics speak to us in very novel and unusual ways.
right,
We all have defenses built up against words. So if I don't think I'm worthy of love, everyone on the planet can tell me I am, but I just don't get it. I don't
right.
hear it. So psychedelics will do things like they'll use myth, story, they'll show us things from a detached perspective, they'll play games or simulations, they'll shake us up and make us feel certain things, they'll get things through to us in a way other than just telling us. Sometimes it's not clear exactly what that message was. Sometimes they're telling us something that seems confusing or it's symbolic or archetypal. So sometimes you have to kind of unthread, what does that mean? What does
Hmm.
that mean to me? And help someone in that process. And then help them to integrate that, help them to understand it, absorb it, and make it a part of their lives.
Wow. Yeah, that's good stuff. Um, so I'm deeply interested in having an ayahuasca experience. Never have. Um, people report, life-changing things such as some of the stuff that you're talking about when they have these experiences. Can you maybe explain exactly what ayahuasca is to our listeners, and then kind of what, people get out of these kind of experiences when they have them?
Yeah, ayahuasca is a mixture of two plants that's indigenous to South America. Somehow, the people of the jungle, hundreds or thousands of years ago, figured out that they could take a plant that contains DMT, dimethyltryptamine. You'll hear about DMT people smoking DMT. It's an instantaneous psychedelic, but if you ingest DMT orally, something called monoamine oxidase, an enzyme in your body, will disarm it before it has any effect. So you can sit there and eat DMT all day long and nothing will happen. If you add in another plant that is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, MAOI, and mix that with the DMT, now it's orally active. So you take these plants, you crush them up, you boil them, you concoct it down into this sort of a foul tasting, very thick, bitter brown substance and drink that stuff. And it's a very powerful psychedelic that can lead you on a 4 to 8, 12-hour journey in which many things can happen. You can see your own, people report dying repeatedly. You can die, you can go crazy, you can get a picture of your life from the past, you can get an idea of what's going to happen in the future. It's a typical strong psychedelic with a very strong spirit essence to it. It's serious medicine, and ayahuasca is usually done more than once. So here in the West, we have a sort of abbreviated version of a ceremony where you'll do it like Friday night and then Saturday night. And ayahuasca is one of the few psychedelics that doesn't cause immediate tolerance. So if I took a certain amount of mushrooms, if I took that same amount the next night, it'd be like half as effective. It might not even work. Ayahuasca actually kind of potentiates itself. Drink it and then drink it again. It's just as powerful, maybe a little bit more.
Wow.
Ayahuasca in the jungle, when you go down there for these retreats, sometimes you'll drink it 3, 5 times in a couple of weeks.
Hmm.
Here, it's usually like a 2-night deal, but it's done on multiple occasions in the same sort of cycle.
And that's important.
It seems to be because I have seen many times when people have, well, there are a couple of things that happen the first night. One time someone said, I think of it like getting ready for a party. Friday night you clean up, and then Saturday night you have the party. Because sometimes people will have a disturbing experience the first night, and someone will say, that's it, I'm done, I'm out. And I've seen the facilitator or shaman talk them into waiting and doing it a second time so that that thing gets settled and wrapped up. It's just the first part of what's going to happen to them. Sometimes the first time people take ayahuasca, it's the only psychedelic I really see this with at this level. Nothing happens physiologically. People may purge, they might throw up. That happens almost normally on ayahuasca, but they won't have any visions. So someone like me who's got experience with psychedelics might drink 1 cup and be gone. This person who's never tried anything can drink 3, 4 cups and feel nothing.
Wow.
That usually happens the first night, the second night, then something happens for them. But yeah, there's a reason for that cycle, if you will, of more than one ceremony with ayahuasca.
Mm-hmm. Mm. What's the difference between that and, say, something like LSD or MDMA?
Well, MDMA, you have to separate out. It's not a true psychedelic. It's what's called an empathogen or an entactogen. It's a heart opener. And it does not have the visions that you'll get with psychedelics. I don't call them hallucinations because you get visual distortions with psychedelics, but if your eyes are open, you usually don't hallucinate something that's not there. I think it's actually a sort of a sharpening or a deepening of your visual capabilities. But MDMA doesn't really do that. MDMA is a heart opener, and in a therapeutic context, MDMA, when you're, say, with the eye shades and headphones, like they do in the MAP studies for PTSD, can show you a lot of things from your life and help you heal from your trauma, show you wounds from your childhood and your life, and help you get past those, understand them, have empathy or compassion for yourself, for other people who were involved. So MDMA is kind of off to the side as not being a real psychedelic side. Within that, things like ayahuasca, San Pedro, mescaline, LSD, mushrooms, all have their own sort of characteristics in the way that they work. They kind of get to the same place. But, ayahuasca is very ceremonial. It has a certain feel to it, has a certain grounding, has a certain spirit or intelligence, you might think if you took it. LSD to me is a bit more cerebral. It's very mind oriented and it connects you to everything outside yourself. And mushrooms are sort of heart oriented and keep you on the ground and centered with Mother Earth. So they have their different feels and flavors. LSD can last 8, 10, 12 hours. Mushrooms are 4 to 6 hours. Ayahuasca can range anywhere in there. So they've all got their own idiosyncrasies and characteristics and ways of working.
And what do you think these experiences are? I mean, aside from, hallucinations or spiritual visions, I mean, where is this coming from? Because sometimes it almost seems like otherworldly. Like I've heard stories now, like I said, I haven't had the experience of having ayahuasca or even psychedelics for that matter. But like there's people that like maybe might report seeing something spiritual that's not even in their frame of mind of their religion concept, right? They may be a Christian or a Catholic and they see something that's like Hindu.
Yeah, or they might be an atheist and see something with a religious overtone.
Yeah.
I saw something recently that was very interesting that talked about that. And they talked about that story of the 5 blind men who encountered the elephant. Do you know that? So one had the tail and they said, what is this thing? He said, it's a rope. Other one had the leg and he said, no, it's a tree. Other one has the tusk. He says, it's a spear. It was the same animal, but they all had their own experience of it. So somewhere I was seeing this where someone was saying that they believe that spiritual experiences are very much like that. They're all touching the same fabric, but they're doing it through the context of their own lens, their own life, their own understanding. They're having a spiritual experience, but what they see, how they see it, and how it affects them is affected by many things. We're all so unique in the way that we perceive things, and the way that we expect things to happen, that a spiritual experience isn't something homogenous for anyone. I think it's very individualized, but there is definitely an experience you can have on these substances where you get to feel direct contact with something other than, larger than, outside yourself, even if you feel that you're a part of that thing. For myself, I have always had the sense that I am of part of God. It was all sort of an equal proposition. And I got the distinct feeling one time in a psychedelic experience that something outside of me was touching me, and it's something that was actually sort of more powerful than me. So I'm not the whole thing, I'm part of it, but there's something else there that just kind of reached in and touched me. I've had contact with that, I've experienced it. I have it in my daily life sometimes, but yeah, I don't know how that's facilitated by these substances, but I know that outside of that mystical experience, these things have a way of seeming to know what it is that we need to deal with. They will bring up painful incidents from our past so we can be processed. They will make known to us the thing that's bothering us right now. I can't tell you how many times someone comes out of that experience with something like, I didn't realize that this hurt me so much, that this was so important, or this was such a bad thing. Suddenly these things are made clear to them. And it's things that are on your mind, you're just sort of suppressing.
That's so fascinating because it's almost as if it has an intelligence to it, right?
That's
That
what I
it,
tell people when they haven't done it. It's hard to understand this, but once you do, then you'll realize that there's some intelligence at work there.
wow. And it's as if, it's bringing you closer to source or whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely. They seem to have a way of plugging in and scanning us. Here's what this person needs. They need to look at this thing. They need to feel that. They need to think about this.
Wow. And I'm sure, just as you mentioned, what are some of the maybe cases that you've helped out with or experienced that where people have overcome like great things? Can you give an example or two?
Yeah, a lot of people have dealt with anxiety, depression, OCD. Um, I should mention that, there are certainly instances where people will take a psychedelic substance and then afterwards there is some shift or change in them that just never goes away. But it's far more common for someone to have one of these experiences, believe that things are different, and then just like me, have it sort of slide back to where it was. All of these clinical studies that you hear about and read about, all of them have a significant therapeutic component where there's therapy before and after the experience. It's very important that someone have the opportunity to process the experience and to do something with it, to understand it, to internalize it, to make it a part of them, and then if necessary, to make some shift or change as a result of that. So I get a lot of people who come to me asking about psychedelics they don't know, and they say, hey, I hear that this cures depression. And I need to tell them that, there's a possibility, but you're probably going to have to do some work in addition to that to help the psychedelic. All these studies are called things like MDMA assisted therapy, psilocybin assisted therapy. It is the substance assisting the therapy.
Yeah, you have to be willing to take the hard road, right? And to be willing to do the work, put the work in to make the changes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Uh, a lot of these substances get maybe a bad rap, or at least they did at one time. I think, society's starting to be more accepting of substances, but why do you think it has been that way? Why was it demonized in the media and like maybe by the government?
There are a few theories about that. One is that, in a society where you have people needing to buy things and where things like medical and psychological establishment are large and influential bodies, that you can't have things out there that are going to cut them out. You know, you can't go around these institutions. They're far too powerful. But I also believe that it's no coincidence that these things were made illegal right around the time that the Vietnam War was happening. And you can't live in a society that we live. You can't live in a capitalist, consumerist society without a ready, at least willing army. And when you have people burning their draft cards and walking off the fields in Vietnam, they take LSD and wake up in the morning and say, why am I halfway around the world killing someone because someone told me to? This makes no sense. And people were just leaving. People were burning their draft cards. People were not going to go to war. You can't operate this kind of economy / country without an army. So I certainly think that's one reason. I think they were greatly misunderstood. There are a lot of stories about people jumping out of windows and going crazy, but most of those were people who either had way too much LSD or something, or people who should not have been using LSD. You'll hear about people like Sid Barrett from Pink Floyd. Sid Barrett went crazy because he was doing LSD. Well, Sid Barrett showed signs of psychosis before he started doing LSD. His family was trying to have him committed, I believe, but certain people should not work with psychedelics, and people, including people who are schizophrenic, people with history of psychosis, bipolar disorder. There are a lot of different conditions that would contraindicate someone using psychedelics, and people who take certain kind of medications, certain mood stabilizers and so forth. So when LSD basically escaped the laboratory, there are a lot of stories that were made up about what they do. I can remember hearing in school that once you've done LSD 6 times, it actually changes the DNA in your brain, which is absolutely and patently false.
Right, right.
So now we're finding out that actually physiologically, these substances are very safe. There's a chart that shows the number of ER visits and 911 calls for substances every year. And psilocybin's at the bottom. It's under aspirin and cannabis. There are more 911 calls and ER visits every year for cannabis than there are for psilocybin. It is physiologically a very safe substance.
I believe that. And that's well said. And I never heard that about the draft in the military. That's interesting. I guess that you made some valid points there with why that could have been demonized. Very interesting.
Well, you also can't have people being overly happy in this society. So,
Right.
advertising companies figured out back in the 1920s that people buy based on emotions. It used to be like, hey, ours is bigger and costs less, so buy it. And then it turned into, how would you feel? Think about what your neighbors would think if you drove this car.
Well, that you're right. I do think that's true. I mean, if in a monetary society, if people are comfortable and happy with where they are already, like it's kind of hard to sell them on, the next big thing, right?
Unhappy people make better consumers. That's just a fact. So if you think that advertising companies are waiting around for you to be unhappy, you're probably wrong. They're putting unattainable goals in front of you and telling you that people have to look like this and own this and make this much money, and keeping you from happiness so that you keep buying stuff. 70% of what we call the economy is people buying things.
Yep. Well said. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit on? I know you touched on it some, but on the connection with spiritual growth and with the understanding of psychedelics.
Well, I don't like to put too many shoulds around psychedelics. A lot of people use psychedelics with no mind towards spiritual growth. But, my function as a coach is about personal and spiritual development, and I think that they go hand in hand. Spiritual development to me requires a sort of a discipline and a learning that goes in a certain order. There are things that you have to do. You can't just read the sacred text and become enlightened. You have to do certain things. So when clients come to me and say, I don't know what to do spiritually, if it turns out that they don't have a job and their garage is dirty, I'll tell them, dude, you need to get a job and clean your garage. You have to take care of business first. So personal and spiritual development go hand in hand to me. A lot of psychedelic use, when it's therapeutic, is around personal development. A lot of people are after mystical experiences, but a lot of people are trying to solve the problems that they have in this earth so that they can straighten their lives out. That can give you a foundation for spiritual development. But the way that happens with people is vast and varied. People talk about source, they talk about God, whatever that means. They say he, she, but what is that? I don't know what the thing is. There's something that makes everything go, because everything around us is energy and it's moving. Everything is moving. Okay. So what's making everything move? There's some energy there. I mean, everything is just not its own thing moving on its own. You can look at a painting and you can look at all the paints on it, but there's a canvas underneath it. There's a commonality to it. There's a thing that they belong to that makes them hold together in that thing. What is the thing that's making you and me and this computer and these lights and this carpet and everything else go right now? Something's doing that. I don't know what that is. I don't know how to solve that mystery. It's not something I'm concerned with, but I know it's something that's there and people have a lot of different ideas about it. I personally don't really care how people get there. So I'm not a huge fan of organized religion and the things that they do and the actions they take. but I am not opposed to religion in general. Religion should lead people towards being good to each other. So whatever route someone takes to get there, I'm not big on downing someone else's spiritual teachers, path, religion, guru, whatever it might be. If it's getting them there, good for them. And to me, same thing goes for psychedelics. Someone said to me one time when I was talking about something, they said, I think psychedelics are kind of your guru. I said, yeah, I think you're right. They've taught me a lot.
Yeah. Hey, however you get there, right?
Exactly.
As long as you get there.
Exactly. You don't have to be on the path, you just have to be on a path.
Yeah.
Excuse me, you don't have to be on my path, you just have to be on the path.
Right. Deep path,
Yeah.
enlightenment, better understanding, giving love to the world. Yeah.
It comes down to trying to be a better person. That's it.
Absolutely. Constantly trying to become a better person.
Yeah, that's the work, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. If someone wants to do more research before they go diving into psychedelics, do you have any informational sources you could recommend for them?
There are so many sources out there, and it really depends on what someone's looking for. But I would recommend someone do as much research as possible. I would highly recommend looking for a psychedelic society somewhere around, because almost everyone has some sort of meeting, talks, circles, something where you can pick people's brains and ask questions. I host these things at least once a month, and there are always new people there asking questions, doing research, and we're happy to answer questions anytime. You know, Take everything you hear with a grain of salt, because people are happy to give advice, but it's through a filter and it's what works for them. So just make sure that when you're getting answers from someone, you're going to double check it somewhere else. But there are websites like Reddit has all kinds of subgroups for psychedelics, bluelight.com, Erowid, EROWID. There's DMT Nexus, all over Facebook, Reddit, and other places. You can find all kinds of resources to research psychedelics. Ask people a lot of questions. Don't be afraid to ask until you get all the answers that you want. And remember that every substance is different. So ask questions specific to that substance and know what you're doing. You find somebody like me, a coach who understands the process and can walk you through it. For God's sake, take advantage of that.
The importance of preparing for the psychedelic experience. Once they've, picked out their experience and they've, they kind of, want to have an experience with a particular substance, and they maybe have kind of an idea of where they want to do it and that kind of thing. What is the importance of, I guess, prepping for it? Because there is some importance there, right?
There is some importance. And a lot of people will find that once they've decided they want to start working with a substance, that's when they start working with it. You'll find synchronicities, you'll find things coming up for you and memories. A lot of stuff's going to start happening as soon as you start considering this. Now, that is partly because your ego, your subconscious, your body, whatever you want to call it, is realizing that you're considering something that might result in a change. And for better or worse, usually for worse, your brain thinks it would be a very bad idea for you to change. Those habits that are ingrained in us are responses to things that happened when we were young. Something happens, you get hurt, your subconscious steps in and says, don't worry. I'm going to make sure that from now on you do or don't do, say or don't say this, and that won't happen again. And that turns into my problem connecting with my partner. It turns into my inability to get along with certain people. It turns into me judging people. It turns into bad habits that I want to change. But my brain is ingenious at devising these things and hiding them from me. It's really kind of dumb when it comes to knowing that not only they're not protecting me, they're getting in my way now. So you have this internal mechanism that doesn't want you to make any changes. That's the thing that comes up and resists when you start to make changes and break habits. That's the thing that says, I don't feel like it right now, or this is not a good time, or that's too much for me, I'll do it another time. That's what comes in. It's not just that you're lazy, it's that you're being protected. So that thing starts kicking in right away and getting a little nervous because you're going to do something that might damage that protection that's set up for you. You start having memories from the past because you're going to deal with these things that come up. And during all of that, it's important to remember that you should talk to somebody if you've no experience about what might happen. And if you have no experience, I would highly recommend you having at least a sitter with you who understands something about the psychedelic that you're going to be taking, and not do this alone for the first time. But you also have to think about things like set and setting. So set is your mindset. what's going on with me right now. If I'm having a very tough time right now, if I lost someone close to me, if I just lost a job, if I'm having difficulty in my relationship, these are non-specific amplifiers of consciousness. So if something is going wrong in your life, if you think you're going to take psychedelics to get away from that, you're probably mistaken. It's going to put it right here. Psychedelics have a way of taking that thing that's bothering you and say, hey, you need to look at this thing.
Right.
And they're not always gentle about it.
Right.
So you have set, then you have setting. What is my physical setting? Am I going to be comfortable? Do I like the space around me? Is there something that happened here that I might think of? Is there some kind of energy in here that I don't like? Because if so, I'm probably better off somewhere else. And there is no best setting. In fact, there's no best way to do psychedelics. This debate, I call it a debate, it's not real, comes up all the time. What's the best way to do psychedelics? Therapeutically, at a concert, in nature, there's no best way. They're just all different. That's all. It's whatever works for you. But if you haven't worked with it before, I recommend probably being inside so that you're safer, probably with a sitter in a place where you're comfortable and you're not going to have to worry about being disturbed. That's a very big thing. You don't want to worry that someone's going to knock on your door and you're going to have to answer it.
Right.
You want some place where you feel safe, secure, with someone who can help you just let go and do what you're going to do and have the experience you need to have. And you have to not be worried about being disturbed. You have to have a mindset that you're in a place right now where you can handle whatever comes up, whatever's in your mind, and sometimes you don't know that. And you should have an intention. Intention is a very important part of this process.
Yeah, I do believe that. I mean, I've never even done them, but I mean, just the research I've done and, you know, I mean, I've used plenty of substances in my day, but not psychedelics. But yeah, I do believe that you need to have an intention, you know, you need to have a goal or something in mind that, you know, you kind of, I just think it gives you direction, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, intention doesn't mean I want to have this experience. It's this is why I'm doing this.
Right.
Because if you think that you're going to dictate the experience, like I want to have this,
right.
I want to have a mystical experience and go over here and solve that issue. Well, no, it's going to tell you, sorry, before you go there, you're going to have to go here and here and here and here and here. And then you'll eventually get here.
Right. But if you, for example, if you were trying to like maybe kick a nicotine habit and you wanted to become more spiritual, that would be kind of an example of.
That's a good intention, but it might turn out that you need to do something else. So one guy came to me and his intention was to repair his relationship with his father. And then when we got to talking, he had had the experience already. And he was calling me, he's trying to make sense of it. When we got to talking, he had had an experience where he really got like he was unhappy with his job and we started talking about money. Well, eventually what he needed to do was to get a better job so he didn't have to depend on his father financially and create this dynamic that stressed their relationship. When he did that, things were better. So there wasn't a problem here, there was a problem over here. He just wanted to fix this and wasn't thinking about this. Sometimes we think we need to chop a branch off the tree when we really need to water it. And if we knew the answer, we wouldn't have to go to these substances. So having an intention is great. Just know that you might not go straight to that intention. You might go to something else, but it should be leading you in that direction.
It's a good point. That's a very good point. So you have something coming up on March 25th. Is it the Guided Psychedelic Journey?
Guided Psychedelic Journey. I talk about what it's like to work with an underground guide. A lot of people found out about that through Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. It's a very good book for beginners, by the way. So we'll talk about, you know, what kind of experience you might have, what kind of questions you might want to ask a guide, what to expect, what to look out for, and what that experience is sort of like, this kind of eye shades, headphones, listening to music, laying back experience.
Very cool. And do you have these often, or?
Yeah, I have some regular talks on, I have another one coming up after that on microdosing.
Oh, okay.
Pretty thorough primer on microdosing. My wife and I do some tantra informed relationship workshops. And yeah, I do talks regularly. We usually have one or two things happening every month.
Very cool. Very cool. So as far as psychedelic experiences go, how often, can I ask you a personal question? How often do you engage in psychedelic experiences?
You know, there was a time when I was doing it sometimes monthly.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't for, I don't know, 5-6 months, just because I haven't felt called to it.
Mm-hmm.
Physiologically, you're safe after a few weeks, but when people ask me like how often can I or should I do it, I usually tell them, I like to make sure that something has been absorbed and integrated from the last experience,
Mm.
because the experience is not the thing, it's what you get from it.
Yeah.
If the experience becomes the thing, then you're just going back over and over again and getting nothing from it, wishing you were in that state.
Right.
Not that it's not a nice place to be, but this should be what you want to make the state you want to be in, and that's something else that you do.
Is that something do you think that teenage kids do often, or maybe inexperienced people?
I'm sure there are a lot of people who use these things recreationally, and I have no
Hmm.
problem with people using
Right.
psychedelics recreationally. I mean, I think it's kind of ironic that in the psychedelic community, we want people to take these so that they can enjoy their lives better by improving themselves. But if they want to enjoy their lives by taking psychedelic at a concert, that's kind of taboo. Like, don't use it recreationally. We've used that as a pejorative. I think if someone wants to enjoy a museum or a movie, another person's body, food, music, whatever, through the lens of a psychedelic, more power to them. Now, people doing that a lot, I'm not sure how often people do that when they're doing it recreationally. I know that when you get done, it's not like you're wanting to rush back again. A lot of people say, "Oh my God, I'm not doing that again," and it takes a month or so before they start thinking about it again. But it's not always an easy thing. There's usually some unease when you go into it. You're a little nervous about
That's valid. Very valid points. Um, what do you have coming up? You got this event on March 25th, and how
it. Yeah.
can they get a hold of you on at this event? It's online, right?
Yeah, you can always go to my website. That's psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com. And you can
Okay.
reach me anytime at greg@psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com.
And then you're
Look on Facebook, I'm Psychedelic Integration Specialist.
open to, as far as just new clients, if you will, or people that are looking to have the integration done. You've got room for people to.
Yeah, I always have a couple of slots open because people
Mhm.
call me who are acute, had a bad experience they need to talk about. So there's usually a couple of slots open during the week.
Right.
And I have 2 openings for regular clients right now. About half of my clients are non-psychedelic in that they're not doing integration so much; they're just doing coaching.
uh, and then for these people that have these bad experiences, because you hear that a lot, that
Yeah.
people can have bad experiences. uh, Typically, once you help them to understand the experience, how do they typically view it? Do they still view it very negatively, or does their opinion change somewhat?
Well, it's been in one study, people called it one of the five most psychologically difficult experiences of their lives. But there are people who understood going in it was going to be difficult. It's much more difficult for people who don't understand that. So some people don't know that what psychedelics do is to bring unconscious material to the conscious. So if you go to a therapist for a few years, you've got some deep-seated issues, eventually you're going to crack. You're going to break down crying and you're going to feel like shit in the therapist's office. You'll feel better later because you got this out of you. But it takes a while for that to come up because you've been holding it down a long time. That's what we do as human beings. We hold these things down. We don't want to deal with them. Psychedelics don't have months. They've got a few hours. So you take a psychedelic and it comes up and says, here's that thing you need to look at immediately. Now, if you don't understand that that's part of the process and that you have a chance to either get in that or run from it, some people think that something's wrong. Oh my God, I'm having a bad trip. This must be bad stuff I bought. This is not what's supposed to be happening. And then they start pushing back. Well, what's going to happen there is the exact same thing as when you push back on anxiety. It's going to keep coming at you. Trying to get away from this experience is just going to prolong it. One of the first things they'll tell you in the clinical studies is if something is frightening to you, you need to turn around and go towards it. That's how you disarm it. It just wants to be seen, experienced, felt, processed. If you're trying not to see it, feel it, process it, experience it, it's going to keep coming after you. And that can turn into a very long, unpleasant experience for some people. Now, there are plenty of experiences where people do go towards it and it still scares the shit out of them. But once you understand later why that happened and maybe what it was trying to teach you, then yes, putting those experiences into context can be very helpful. There's a saying that says, even bad trips can be turned into just difficult experiences. You just have to understand why something happened, what the message is you were supposed to be getting.
Okay, I've got one last question for you, and I ask a lot of my guests this, but I'm really interested on your take because you seem like a deep thinker, and you're someone who's had some psychedelic experiences and been able to maybe process and think things through deeply. What are your thoughts on, I guess, reality in general, as far as when it comes to what we're doing here and what is it that's out there as far as source or God, if you will?
Well, I think that we are spirits who are having this experience in order to learn lessons. And I think that we repeat this experience in different forms and we learn different lessons. And, I've learned some very tough ones this time around. So I won't have to learn those next time. But at the same time, I don't think that it's as simple as reincarnation, where I'm going to come back as, George tomorrow, or, Martha or someone else. I think that there's no such thing as everything without nothing. So there's a possibility that for a while I might just chill and be nothing. I might be something else. I don't know how that works. But I know that when I'm in this form, having this experience, I am learning some very tough lessons so that they can be put behind me. And I feel like that's a process I'm going to repeat until I get to a certain point. And then I can either go here or kind of stick around like a bodhisattva.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, your ideas are similar to a lot of others, and mine as well. Do you think we're all part of like one source of consciousness?
Absolutely. I think that we are just as much the same as every nerve ending on my finger. Those are all one thing, but they all work together. And if you went inside and saw that nerve ending, it would be saying, "No, it's just me. I'm just here by myself."
Yeah,
So yeah, I think that we're all this part of the same thing that's going on. It's just going. It's just happening.
yeah,
And I actually don't know how much truth there is to the fact that we have what you would call an ego. I know that I can remember things, and I know that I'm having a thought that I am the person I've been told I am, but how do I know that that's not just an ongoing thought? I don't even know if there's that little pod thing that people think of as an ego.
I've wondered that myself. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Maybe the thought that's thinking there's a thought is just another thought.
Well said. So then, with them words, I mean, you are somewhat a believer of consciousness. Then, I mean, I'm sorry, reincarnation, and that we continue to live on. That death is maybe just an illusion, um, and that. What are your thoughts on psychedelics as far as, does it open up another doorway or another dimension into something that we can't see?
People have those experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have had the experience of talking to um, beings that weren't from here. And, I can't tell you if that's something that was happening in my mind or if it happened for real, but it certainly seemed real to me at the time.
Yeah. I've heard others talk about those kind of experiences as
Yeah.
well. And you had mentioned ego, and I think that's funny because a lot of people talk about psychedelics as like almost being like an ego killer, if you
Yeah.
will, like to where it just.
Yeah. I mean, you can certainly shake yourself up, but you can't kill your ego. And I don't think you should go in with the thought that you're going to kill your ego either, because your ego is going to say, "What are you doing?" I usually tell my ego, "Look, everything's cool. Just going to take a little trip. Not trying to get rid of you.
Right, right.
No
That's
reason to
awesome.
kick back at me."
That's great. Well, listen, Greg, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time tonight to talk about these things. Like I said, I feel like it's an important topic that I've really wanted to have on my show before, and you're the first expert to have on with this topic. So it's been a great discussion. I think we've learned a lot. Where can we find you? I know you had mentioned earlier some of the places, but just go ahead and let the listeners know where we can find you, where we can get a hold of the work you're doing.
Yeah, psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com. That's my website. It's usually got everything I'm doing. Facebook, I'm Psychedelic Integration Specialist. You can always get me, Greg, at psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com.
Thanks again for coming on the show, Greg.
Thanks, Dylan. You got a great show. Thanks, man.
Thanks, man.